You wake up early, you step out into your yard just after dawn, the grass is soaked, your shoes are wet within seconds. That water came from nowhere, from the air itself. Now here is the part nobody told you. You can collect that same water, gallons of it, even in a place as bone dry as the Sahara, using things already sitting in your garage right now. This is a real method. Farmers and desert tribes used it for centuries. Then, somewhere along the way, we simply forgot. I remember standing on my back porch one late August morning, watching dew drip off the metal leg of an old chair, forming a tiny puddle on the concrete, and thinking to myself, there has to be something to this. In 1912, near the Black Sea, a forester built a mound of stones that pulled drinking water straight out of dry air. By the end of this, I will show you exactly what he knew. And it works in your backyard tonight, exactly as your home is right now. For most of my life, I did what you probably do. I turned a handle and water came out. I paid the bill at the end of the month. I never once thought about where it came from or what would happen if it stopped. Water was a service, something other people managed for me, something I rented month after month, year after year, without ever asking a single question. Then one dry summer, our well ran low. Not dry, just low enough to scare me. The water that came up was cloudy and tasted like a penny. And for the first time in my adult life, I felt that old, cold worry that my grandparents must have felt every single day. What if the water simply is not there when I need it? That fear sent me digging into old books, old farm manuals, old journals from people who lived in places where rain almost never fell. And what I found genuinely stunned me. Because it turns out the air around you, even in the driest, most cracked and dusty place on earth, is holding water. Right now. Above the Sahara Desert, the air still carries moisture. Scientists measured it. The atmosphere over that desert holds an astonishing amount of water vapor, thousands of times more water floating invisibly above the sand than sits in all the rivers on the surface. The water is there. It always was. The only question anyone ever needed to answer was how to reach up and pull it down. And people did answer it. That is the part that made me angry once I understood it. This was not lost knowledge in the sense of being unknowable. It was common knowledge that got quietly pushed aside the moment someone realized they could sell you the alternative instead. Let me start with the simplest piece, the one you can prove to yourself before this night is over. Dew. That wet grass on your lawn. Most people think dew is just a nuisance, something that makes your shoes damp and your morning paper soggy. But dew is distilled water falling out of the sky for free, and it does it almost every single night of the year. Here is how it works, and it is beautiful in how simple it is. During the day, the sun heats everything up. At night, that heat radiates back out into the sky, and surfaces cool down fast. Metal, glass, a taut sheet of plastic, a blade of grass, they cool faster than the air around them. When the warm, moist air touches those cold surfaces, the water vapor it carries has nowhere to go but out. It condenses. It becomes liquid. It beads up and runs down. That is dew. That is the whole secret. You are watching the air surrender its water every single morning and calling it an inconvenience. Now, I want you to understand the scale of this, because when I first read the numbers, I did not believe them. Researchers studying dew collection have found that a single square yard of the right surface, angled correctly and left out overnight, can gather a meaningful amount of clean water by morning. Not a few sad drops. Real, drinkable water. Multiply that across a larger surface and you are talking about liters per night, gathered from nothing, costing nothing, using no power and no plumbing. And it gets better because dew water is naturally distilled. When water evaporates into the air and then condenses back onto a clean surface, it leaves the salt, the minerals, and most of the contamination behind. That cloudy, penny-tasting water from my well, the dew forming on my porch railing that same morning was cleaner than what I was pumping out of the ground. I did not learn that in school. I doubt you did either. But here is where the story gets much older and much stranger than a wet lawn. Because if dew forms on its own, the real question becomes, how much can you force it to form on purpose? And that question was answered over 100 years ago by a man everyone has since forgotten. And that question was answered over 100 years ago by a man everyone has since forgotten. If you want to go deeper into all of this before we move on, I put together a book that walks through the full system, from the first small wins you can set up tonight to the deep leverage techniques that can make a household genuinely water independent. It is called First Wins, Deep Leverage, and the Full System, and you will find the link in the description below. It is the thing I wish I had when I first started digging into this. Worth a look before you go any further, but the knowledge did not die completely. It went quiet, and it survived in the hands of a few stubborn people who refused to let it go. And that is where the story gets even better. His name was Friedrich Zibold, and he was a forester and engineer working in the Crimea near the ancient city of Feodosia on the coast of the Black Sea. Around the year 1912, Zibold was studying the ruins of that old Greek city, and he noticed something that did not add up. Scattered around the ancient hills were enormous piles of stones, each one connected to a network of clay pipes that ran down toward where the old city fountains had been. The city, in its prime, had far more water than the local springs could possibly explain. Where had it come from? Zibold had a theory that sounded to the people of his day completely insane. He believed the ancient Greeks had built those stone piles as water condensers. He believed they were pulling water out of thin air, using nothing but rock, and using it to supply an entire city in a dry coastal region, and he decided to prove it. So around 1912, he built one himself, a massive bowl-shaped mound of beach stones, each one carefully sized and stacked, sitting on a base of concrete high on a hill. The idea was simple, even if the scale was not. During the day, the outer stones heated in the sun. At night, the deep stones stayed cool, and air moving through all those gaps between the rocks would hit the cold surfaces and give up its moisture. The water would trickle down through the pile, collect at the bottom, and run out through a pipe. And it worked. Zibold's condenser produced water. Real accounts from the time describe it yielding gallons of clean water a day, condensed straight out of the coastal air, with no rain and no spring feeding it. A pile of rocks, drinking from the sky. He had proven that the ancients knew something we had completely lost. Now, why does almost nobody know his name? Why did you never hear this in any classroom? That is the question I could not let go of, and the answer is the beginning of something that made my blood run a little cold. Because right around the time Zibold was proving that free water could be pulled from the air, another idea was taking over the world. The idea that water should come to you through a pipe from a central utility that you would pay for by the gallon forever. Centralized water was not just about convenience. It was about a permanent, unbreakable monthly relationship between you and whoever owned the pipes. And a man showing that you could get clean water from a heap of stones in your own yard was, to put it plainly, bad for that business. I am not saying anyone burned Zibold's papers. I am saying that when a method makes people independent and free, and another method makes them dependent and paying, only one of those two gets taught, funded, promoted, and built into every new town. The stone condenser did not lose because it failed. It lost because there was no money in your freedom. But the knowledge did not die completely. It went quiet, and it survived in the hands of a few stubborn people who refused to let it go. And that is where the story gets even better. Because about 20 years after Zibold, in the south of France, a man named Achille Knapen picked up the same idea and pushed it further. Around 1930, in a village called Trans-in-Provence, Knapen built what he called an air well. It was a towering stone structure, a great cone rising up out of the hillside, designed with a hollow core and a mass of interior surfaces meant to stay cool. He believed he could improve on the ancient design and produce water for whole communities in dry regions where wells were failing. Knapen's air well still stands in that French village today, nearly a century later. A monument to an idea that the modern world decided it did not need. Tourists walk past it and have no idea they are looking at one of the last surviving pieces of a technology that could have made millions of people water independent. It became a curiosity, a footnote, a strange stone tower from an eccentric old inventor. Meanwhile, I was paying a water bill every month and lying awake worrying about a low well, never once told that men had solved this problem before my grandparents were even born. So I started experimenting myself. And this is where I want to talk directly to you, because I know exactly what you are thinking right now. You are thinking this is fascinating, but it is not for you. You are thinking you are too old to be stacking tons of rock in your yard, or too busy, or that you do not have some special material or some engineering degree, or that this only works for people with acres of land and endless free time. I thought all of that too. So this next part I built specifically for you, and you can do it tonight with things you already own. Forget the giant stone tower. You do not need it to prove the principle and start collecting real water. Here is the simplest working version I found, and it costs you nothing. Take a sheet of plastic, a painter's drop cloth, a clean trash bag cut open and laid flat, an old shower curtain, anything smooth and waterproof will do. In the evening, before the sun goes down, dig a shallow, wide bowl-shaped dip in a patch of bare ground, about the width of your arm spread out. Place a clean cup or a small bucket in the center at the bottom. Now lay your plastic sheet loosely over the whole dip and weigh down the edges all the way around with rocks or dirt so no air escapes. Finally, set one small stone in the very center of the sheet, right over your cup, so the plastic sags down into a gentle cone with the low point hanging directly above the container. That is it. Now here's what happens overnight while you sleep. The ground under the sheet still holds a little warmth and moisture. As the night cools, that moisture rises, hits the underside of the cold plastic, and condenses into droplets. Those droplets run down the slope of the cone and drip, one by one, off that low center point, straight into your cup. By morning, you will have clean, distilled water sitting there, water you watched come out of dry dirt and cold air. In a desert survival situation, this exact design, called a solar still, has kept people alive. In your backyard, it is proof, held in your own two hands, that the air and the ground around you are quietly full of water. Want it even simpler? Tie a clean plastic bag tightly around a leafy branch of a living tree or shrub in the evening, sealing it shut around the stem. Leaves breathe out water vapor all day and night. By morning, that bag will have water pooled in the bottom corner, pulled straight out of the plant in the air, with you doing nothing but tying a knot. I did this on a maple branch in my own yard the first week, just to see, and I stood there the next morning holding a bag with real water sloshing in the bottom, feeling like an absolute fool for having paid for water my whole life without knowing this was possible. None of this requires strength, money, youth, or expertise. It requires a plastic bag and a willingness to try one thing before you decide it is not for you. But these small tricks, as satisfying as they are just the doorway. Because while I was tying bags around branches in my backyard, I discovered that in the driest corners of the world, people were not playing with cups. They were harvesting water from the air on a scale large enough to supply entire villages. And they were doing it right now, today, with a method so simple it will make you question everything you have been told about water scarcity. I am talking about fog. And this is where the Sahara itself enters the story, because on the edge of that great desert in the mountains of Morocco sits the largest working proof that this old idea was never a fantasy. High on a mountain called Bout Mesguida, in a dry and forgotten region of southwestern Morocco near the desert's edge, the villages had no reliable water for generations. Women and girls walked for hours every day, hauling water back on their backs, and the wells were drying up. Rain barely came, but fog did. Thick banks of fog rolled in off the ocean and drifted through those mountains, and for centuries everyone watched that fog pass by as if it were nothing but mist. Then, starting in the 2010s, a project went up on that mountain that changed everything. They call it the Cloud Fisher. It is, at its heart, almost laughably simple. Giant panels of fine mesh netting strung up like vertical sails facing into the wind. That is the whole machine. No pumps, no power, no moving parts. When the fog blows through the mesh, tiny water droplets in that fog snag on the threads, just like they snagged on Zibold stones and just like dew snags on your grass. The droplets merge, grow heavy, run down the netting, and collect in troughs at the bottom that feed into tanks and pipes running down to the village. The numbers on this are what floored me. On a good foggy day, a single square yard of that mesh can collect a remarkable volume of clean water, and the full array on that mountain gathers thousands of liters, enough to pipe running water directly into the homes of hundreds of people who never had it before. Women who once walked hours for a jug now turn a tap. In one of the driest regions bordering the largest hot desert on the planet, they are drinking the fog, and they built it out of netting. This is the thing the Sahara does not want you to sit and think about for too long. Not the desert itself, of course. The desert has no agenda, but the entire industry of scarcity that surrounds it, the endless message that dry places are hopeless, that water must be trucked in and bottled and sold and rationed, that you are always one step away from running out. That message falls apart the moment you understand that the mesh on a mountain, the stones on a hill, and the plastic sheet in your yard are all doing the exact same thing. They are catching what was always there. And it goes back further than Morocco, further even than Zibold, because the more I read, the more I found the same fingerprints all over history in every dry place humans ever managed to survive. The ancient Nabateans, the people who built the rose-red city of Petra in the deserts of what is now Jordan, thrived for centuries in a place that gets almost no rain. They ran a whole civilization with fountains and gardens and thousands of people in the middle of the desert. How? They were obsessive masters of catching every drop of water the sky offered, including moisture and runoff that everyone else let vanish into the sand. They cut channels into bare rock, built cisterns, and shaped the very ground to harvest water most people would swear was not even there. In England, farmers for hundreds of years built what they called dew ponds, shallow basins lined with clay and straw, carefully constructed so that overnight condensation and mist would collect and hold water for their sheep and cattle high on chalk hills where no stream ran. Some of those dew ponds held water through the driest summers when everything around them cracked and browned. It was not magic. It was a design passed hand to hand, farmer to farmer, that we bulldozed and forgot the moment a pipe could be run out to the field instead. Do you see the pattern now? In every corner of the world in every century, ordinary people who had no utility company and no monthly bill figured out how to take water from the air and the fog and the dew. They were not geniuses. They were not equipped with anything you do not have. They simply lived in a time before someone convinced them that water was a product to be purchased rather than a resource to be gathered. And one by one, as the pipes and the bills and the bottles arrived, these methods were allowed to fade, until a whole generation grew up believing that a dry sky means no water and that the only answer is to pay. I refuse to believe that fading was an accident. Not all of it. There is too much money in your dependence for the free method to have simply slipped everyone's mind at the same time, but I promised you something at the very beginning. I promised that a forester near the Black Sea in 1912 knew a secret, and I promised to hand it to you. So let me now give you the piece that pulled all of this together for me, the detail that turned a pile of curiosities into a method I actually trust. This is the part I found buried deepest, and it is the part almost nobody talks about, because it is the difference between a fun trick and water you can rely on. When Zibold studied those ancient Greek stone piles around Theodosia, and when later engineers studied his work, they zeroed in on one specific thing that made the ancient designs so much better than the modern attempts that failed. It was not the size of the stones. It was the gaps. The ancients did not use one solid mass or a pile of tiny gravel. They used stones of a very particular medium size, stacked loosely, so that air could flow deep into the very center of the pile through countless winding channels, touching an enormous amount of cold surface on its way through. The secret was maximizing the cold surface area that moving air actually contacts, while keeping that surface shaded and cool from the day's heat. And that single principle, hidden in a stone mound from before the time of Christ and rediscovered by a forgotten Russian in 1912, is the key that makes every version of this work, from the mountain in Morocco to the cup in your backyard, more cold surface, more airflow across it, more shade from the daytime sun. That is the entire formula for pulling water from the air. Everything else is just a way to arrange those three things. So here is what you do this weekend, and here is why it will work far better than the simple version I gave you earlier. You are going to build a small dew and condensation collector using that ancient principle, and you can do it with materials from any hardware aisle or, better yet, from your own scrap pile. Take a large, clean container, a bucket or a bin, and inside it stand up as much cold, smooth, high-surface material as you can pack loosely. Glass bottles, metal cans, smooth stones, anything that cools fast at night, arranged with plenty of gaps between them so air can wind all the way through. Set the whole thing outside in an open spot, out of any daytime sun during the day, if you can shade it, so the mass stays cool. Angle a collecting surface, a slanted sheet of metal or glass, above it tilted down toward a jar. Overnight, as the cool night air with its evening moisture drifts through all those gaps and across all that cold surface, it gives up its water exactly as it did in the ancient piles, and that water runs down into your jar. You have just built, in miniature, the machine that supplied an ancient Greek city. You are drinking from the same sky the Nabateans drank from. The knowledge existed for thousands of years. It was pushed aside so the pipes could be sold. A forester on the Black Sea kept it alive in 1912. An inventor in France carried it in 1930. Villagers in Morocco proved it at scale in our own time. And now it is sitting in your hands, in your yard, tonight. The first morning I walked out and lifted the glass off my own little version and saw clear water standing in the jar underneath. Water I had not paid for, water no pipe delivered, water I had watched appear out of nothing but cold rock and night air. I felt something I had not felt in years. I felt like I had gotten something back, something that had been quietly taken from me and everyone I know, and sold back to us one bottle and one bill at a time. That is the real point of all this. It was never truly about the water alone. It was about knowing deep in your bones that you are not as helpless or as dependent as they need you to believe. The sky above the driest desert on earth is full of water, and the way to reach it is not a secret that requires a laboratory or a fortune. It is a pile of cold stones, a sheet of plastic, and a piece of knowledge that ordinary people held on to for centuries before we let it slip through our fingers. You just picked it back up. You are the kind of person who would rather understand how something works than pay forever to have it handled for you. And that instinct, that quiet refusal to just accept the bill, is exactly what every one of those forgotten inventors had in common with you. So let me ask you something, and I really do want you to answer. Have you ever noticed water collecting somewhere it should not? Dew dripping off a railing, moisture beating inside a window, condensation on a cold pipe, and simply wiped it away without thinking? Now that you know what you were actually looking at, tell me about it. Leave a comment and describe the spot in your home or yard where you have seen the air giving up its water, because I read these and I want to know where you are going to build your first collector. Do not just think it, type it out. This audience is quiet, and the people who need this most will only find it if you speak up. And if you believe, like I do, that the simple, free, hand-me-down methods our grandparents used were never meant to disappear, then come stand with the rest of us who are digging them back up one by one. Subscribe, not to support me, but to join the people quietly recovering what was taken from the kitchen table and sold back to us. Because next time, I am going to show you the forgotten way people kept food cold and fresh for weeks without electricity, using nothing but the ground beneath their feet, and a principle just as old as the stones on that Crimean hill. You are going to want to be here for that one. This video showed you the idea, but inside the practical wisdom circle, I pick up right where we stopped, walking you through the full backyard dew harvesting build, surface by surface. If something puzzles you, ask me directly, and a real person, me, answers you myself. You won't be alone either. You'll belong. Just point your phone's camera at the code on screen, and you can cancel anytime with one click.